Incorrect. The fight to make is Paulo Costa versus Gregory Rodriguez. Signed, sealed, delivered for 5 rounds. I will hear no debate. Stylistically, fantastic matchup. In regards to characters, fantastic matchup. In regards to what makes sense for their next career, fantastic matchup. In fact, Gregory Rodriguez could even be the new version of Paulo Costa. And Paulo Costa has come out and said he's going back to his old fighting style where he just throws heavy leather and marches forward. So if you want to talk about a stylistic matchup, that is the one to make. What is next for Corey Sandhagen? Firstly, good evening, Ollie. Secondly, what is next for Corey Sandhagen? Good question. I like the thought of... Good question. Cheeto seen that fight and it was very convincing. Oh, this is really wrecking my brains. Corey Sandhagen. Maybe a Rob Font? Quite possibly a Rob Font could be next. I'm not too sure. It's a good question. Throw some names at me. Let's see. Thanks for inspiring me to become an MMA content creator. You are more than welcome. I hope you are enjoying it. Quite a few people have said that, so it's pretty cool. I think RoboCop is quite low. And Abdul Razak does need a ranking. But still, I think we can just have a big jump up. And I like the sound of Paulo Costa. Corey Sandhagen versus Talbot. Payton Talbot is undeniably talented. And thinking about that fight with a Corey Sandhagen is exceptionally fun. However, we have to be realistic. We can't just jump him into the rankings like that as quickly. I inspired you to. Now you're at 7k. Well, that's pretty sick. And that is a lot of people. I always say, just imagine 7,000 people in a room listening to you speak. That's a lot of people. Even 90. You think about 90 people in a room listening to you speak or what you have to put out. That's a lot of people. So don't get desensitized with numbers that you see online. Laura, you're not going to like this. You're not going to like this, but you're about to learn something about me. I do not drink tea. So Yorkshire, PG Tips or Tetley are not my tipple. I drink iced variety of any hot beverage. Iced tea, yes. Iced coffee, yes. No hot drinks. Never have, never will. So none of the above is my answer to that. Do I think Umar Nurmagomedov will be bantamweight champion? I think he has all the skills and attributes to be there 100%. 100%. Does he get there anytime soon? Time will tell. I think that Sean O'Malley fight is very interesting. I didn't think that Umar was quite going to have the boxing to compete with Corey Sandhagen. I was very wrong there. I didn't think he would have that over 5 rounds. I was wrong. So it'll be interesting to see if he does face Sugar. Where am I from? London. How was Thailand? Thailand was incredible. In fact, I'm thinking daily about when I'm going back and I'm thinking the new year. To be honest, I've got a lot of work I want to do out there. And I've got a lot of sun that I want to absorb out there, quite honestly. We need to see Yair Rodriguez versus Wonderboy at lightweight. Let me be very clear. That fight is never going to happen. So if you want a dream matchup, you're going to have to re-engineer your thinking. Wonderboy is never making 155. And Yair doesn't look like he's going to lightweight anytime soon. Most anticipated fight? Undoubtedly Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. I believe that's the biggest fight that you can make in the company at the moment, outside of Jone Aspinall. And I don't believe that has as much global appeal as Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway does, just because of their stars right now and what they've both recently done. But in regards to anticipation, I'm always throwing John Jones in that conversation. And when you mix it in with Tom, it's a no-brainer. I think that's one of the biggest fights you can make at the moment. But outside of that, Max Holloway, Ilia Topuria is undoubtedly the most highly anticipated matchup. A lot of unknowns in that fight. Have I ever been to a UFC event? I certainly have. This was the first event I ever attended, and I've been to multiple since then. Abu Dhabi, Manchester, and the other London event. But none have even come close to this. And to be honest, I actually quite like watching it from home. Do I know what's happening with Oliveira? I think they're going to go down the Dan Hooker route. That sounds like the fight that they're going to look to make. And I think it's the one that makes sense. I don't think there's going to be an interim belt at lightweight. But I do believe they're going to make Charles Oliveira Dan Hooker as a #1 contendership. And whoever wins that will be looking at a title fight next. Towards the end of the year, I believe they'll look to do that on UFC 310. And I'm just guessing. But I think that's what they're going to look to do. Good evening, Peter. Islam versus Arman 2. That's an incredible matchup. And when you see how close the first fight was, you can't help but be excited by that. Now, early take on that fight is, just from what I've seen recently in regards to Arman's game and in regards to Islam's game, I think Islam's the one that's made more growth. Just in the different layers that he has to offer. Don't get me wrong, Arman Tsarukyan is championship caliber and is exceptionally talented. But when you look at Islam Makhachev, he just has so many tools in his bag in all disciplines. Whether it be his boxing, in the clinch where he's slipping and countering, whether it be the Muay Thai that he adds to the clinch with the knees where he broke Dustin Poirier's nose, the elbows that he lands there, the judo he incorporates. Now, Arman Tsarukyan has a lot of these skills. I just think Islam's got slightly more layers to it. So I would take him early on. Does Merab have a chance of winning? I don't think you could ever watch Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr Yan and question him having a chance against anyone in the bantamweight division. Now, saying that, I do believe Sean O'Malley is the hardest test for him at 135 pounds. And that is the case for absolutely anyone right now. The confidence is at an all-time high. His ability to perform under the spotlight and on the moment is better than it's ever been. And it's always been fantastic. And his striking is just so hard to mitigate. So difficult. I honestly think, although not a conventional choice, the hardest matchup for Sean O'Malley right now is Petr Yan throughout that whole 135 pound division. And if he stays healthy and puts together 1-2 more wins, that's going to be a real problem. But you've got the likes of Umar, of course, coming up the ranks. So there's a lot of talent, Thank you, EC. Appreciate it. Thank you for the roses, as always. Burns or Brady? Good question. I think the wrestling from Sean Brady is good. I don't think it's as layered as someone like an Islam Makhachev. You're typically going to see Sean Brady go with blast doubles, and he also goes to that single leg. It'll be interesting to see if he's added anything in regards to his offensive wrestling. But when it comes to his top control, he is elite. And the strength gets spoken about by so many different people. So when we look at this fight on paper, of course, we know the credentials of Gilbert Burns. But the jiu-jitsu only is a factor if Gilbert Burns is off his back with space. And I think Sean Brady has such a suffocating top pressure, it's going to be hard to actually get that space to get anything offensive off. So we could see a world in if Sean Brady does get the takedown and Gilbert Burns is a little bit happy to accept it once or twice just because he feels confident on the ground or to get back up. We could see quite a smothering style where he just chips away with a few elbows and a few shots to the body. Gilbert Burns mitigates it for the most part, and then it keeps standing. And when it's standing, that's going to be an interesting conundrum because we obviously have the heavier hands I would give to Gilbert Burns, but the more refined boxing, probably going to give to Sean Brady. But the truth of it is, Sean's so early in his career, and he has had a setback, that's going to be interesting to see where he's at because he's going to have a lot of growth in between these fights and I'm quite excited to see it. At this moment, I would lean towards Gilbert Burns, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sean Brady got the win whatsoever. I don't know if O'Malley is a completely different fighter, to be honest. I think he's doing the same things that he's always done. He's just doing them at an even higher level with even more confidence. And I think the thing with Sean O'Malley, which sometimes doesn't get spoken about enough, is the basics. Yes, he's a very flashy, charismatic guy outside of the cage. And of course, he has techniques which translate into the cage with that vibe. But it's his basics, his jab, his 1-2. He's defensively sound out of both stances. You'll see a lot of fighters switch stances, but they're not comfortable out of that stance and they stay there for too long. Typically, with most people, they should get 1 or 2 tricks off in their opposite stance and then revert back. But sometimes you see people stay too long. But Sean really can just stay in either one. He uses great fundamentals from both, keeps people at the end of his punches. Him and Tim Welch have trained so many years on the paddles, just really extending his shots. And because he's so long for bantamweight, that's a real problem to overcome. You think of someone like John Jones, always had the reach advantage, but what made it effective was the fact he could use it. A lot of people can't actually use it. Sean most certainly can. He uses the teeps and the front kicks up the middle. He uses his jab from range and then his lateral movement and his juking feints that he's constantly giving you is just overloading the mind and making it very hard to track his leg down. So it's very dangerous covering space with Sean O'Malley because firstly, you have to track him down. Secondly, you're looking to shoot in on knees, uppercuts, and a full arsenal of attacks up the middle. So it's a very, very dangerous game. But one thing that could benefit Merab is that he probably won't compute as many of the feints and the fakes that Sean O'Malley gives. Sometimes he can overload good strikers because he's showing so many things. But Merab will probably just throw caution to the wind and just look to close the distance anyway. That could be to his benefit and that most certainly could be to his detriment. So it'll be interesting to see. Lerone Murphy-Dan Ige is a really good fight. Really good fight. It will be interesting to see how Dan Ige looks to approach this. Because if I were to guess, I would guess that Lerone is going to try and stay a little bit further out of range at more of a kicking distance and look to set up his kicks and then use his hands secondary to that. But with Dan Ige, he is a very sharp boxer. He does use very good fundamentals and he can capitalize on any mistake. We have seen Lerone go 5 rounds. So that's ticked off. We have seen a main event. That's ticked off. And he's constantly just evolving. And he's got the confidence of someone that's never been beaten. Coming from a very good gym. Very well taught. Very disciplined in his approach in his game. And he can get finishes as well. So that's actually a really interesting matchup, to be honest. I don't think I look like Ian Gary, to be fair, but okay. Who am I backing, Alexa Grasso or Shevchenko? Early on, I'm just leaning towards Alexa Grasso. But again, that's a fight I quite honestly could see going either way. But the reason why I favour Alexa Grasso in this fight is more so the intangibles. Of course, the obvious narrative with age, less miles on the clock, but also Mexican Independence Day, the Sphere, a major event, her teammate and coach, Diego Lopez, being on the card as well. It brings a certain level of camaraderie to the training room, to the back room. And then, of course, a little added incentive on the night as well. Now, not just saying that's the reason I think she wins. I think she's got a lot more to prove in this sport. Now, Shevchenko has a bulletproof mindset, and I know she's coming back for blood quite literally. But it wouldn't surprise me if Alexa Grasso just edges this one out. So I'm favouring her on that. Hardwick fight week. That's always a good week for sure. Figgy versus Aldo. Oh my lord. That's what I need to see. It is also clear now. Corey Sandhagen versus Jose Aldo. That's the fight I want to see. Corey Sandhagen does have the ability to take mostly anyone down. Mostly. But Jose Aldo has some of the most elite takedown defense of all time. So I can see that being a stand-up battle. And if it's a stand-up battle with Jose Aldo, insert anyone in the world, it's a very competitive fight. I don't care who it is. And I would really like to see that. Volk versus Du Bronx. Possibly. That is a fun fight, and that is a massive fight if they need to just bolster any sort of pay-per-view. But honestly, I think they go Charles Oliveira versus Dan Hooker, and they go Alexander Volkanovski versus the winner of either Max or Ilya. As much as I don't want Max to lose, I also don't really want to see a full fight, bearing in mind that he's lost 3. That's a very lose-lose situation, I believe, for Volk. Of course, it's also a winning situation because he has the chance to go out and get the belt. I just mean as a fan's perspective, do we want to see that 4 times? I personally don't, especially with how conclusive the 3rd chapter of that fight was, and one of the most dominant title fights you're ever looking to see. Did your first ever Muay Thai session? Nice. How did it go? I love Muay Thai. That is by far my favourite discipline of all martial arts. What's a fight I'm most excited for? Ilya Max. Jonathan Haggerty vs Superlek. Pretty excited for that. And also Merab Sean, to be honest. Watching Sugar Sean O'Malley is one of my favourite fighters, so would have to put him up there. Honestly, I don't know enough about Muay Thai, or at least I don't watch it enough to give you an in-depth breakdown of Haggerty versus Superlek. But best believe I'm going to be watching. Can I give an ultimate rundown on Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones? Okay. I'll set the scene. Once upon a time, there was a main event between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic for Madison Square Garden. At this point, Tom Aspinall had not won the interim belt, and he hadn't yet fought anyone in that top echelon bracket which would suggest he's next for the belt. Fair enough. Jon Jones then gets injured. Tears his pectoral muscle straight off the bone, bad injury, going to be out for a while. Who steps in on 10 days notice? Tom Aspinall. But Stipe Miocic says, I don't want to fight Tom, I want to fight Jon and Jon only. Okay, that makes sense. So what the UFC do is they make a fight between Tom Aspinall and the scariest man in the heavyweight division, who is knocking everyone out, Sergey Pavlovich. Bearing in mind that Sergey Pavlovich was actually preparing for this fight as a backup. So he was in camp, Tom Aspinall was not. Tom tweaks his back a couple of days out from the preparation, cannot even obtain a visa, but manages to make it to New York and to the main event, saving the day for both Stipe and Jon. Tom goes in there and within 69 seconds flatlines the scariest man in the heavyweight division. Now we have a bit of a problem because Tom has had 9 fights in the UFC conclusively, with 8 wins and 7 finishes in the very first round. The only man to make it out of the first, Andrei Arlovski, who happens to be the fighter who actually got him into the sport originally when he watched the UFC in Manchester. Now, tensions are building between Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones because Tom is clearly the next generation of fighter. He has speed, he has agility, he has boxing, kickboxing, work in the clinch, and then we've seen the submissions as well when he submitted Volkov for the first time in over a decade. So now he's got finishes, top level finishes, and he's building a name on social media. While Stipe Miocic does have one of the best resumes of all time in heavyweight, None of that can be said for him more recently. Time is going on. As we know, MMA is a what have you done for me lately sport, and fans are starting to ask for Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones. Now, Jon keeps saying, I'm not fighting anyone but Stipe Miocic, and Dana White is very much on board with that notion. However, we need another heavyweight fight, and we also need someone to headline a Manchester pay-per-view along with Leon Edwards and Bilal Muhammad. So who do they make? They make Tom Aspinall versus stylistically the toughest matchup you can make in the heavyweight division for him, and the only man to beat him in the UFC, Curtis Blades. He goes out there and starches Curtis Blades within 60 seconds with a jab. And now the whole world and their dogs want to watch Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones. But the UFC are saying, no, we're not doing that. We've got two legends and they deserve this fight. But the fans are saying, okay, we get that, but this isn't a legacy fight. This is for the championship. And Stipe Miocic hasn't been in the octagon since he got flatlined 4 years ago by Francis Ngannou. Hasn't got any recent wins, and the last time he did have a win, Alex Pereira and Ilia Topuria weren't even in the UFC. They weren't even in the UFC. So fans are now saying, okay, cool, we get this legacy fight, but this is not boxing. We need to unify this heavyweight strap. We're not doing giveaway title shots for someone that has fought and knocked out 6 of the top 10 in the heavyweight division in Tom Aspinall. And now we have this conflict between the fan base and the UFC of we want to see Jon versus Tom, but we're not getting it, and likely whoever wins between the heavyweights is going to retire, if not a double retirement. And the UFC full well know it. So that is the full context from start to finish of Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones in all its glory. Whew. That was difficult. That was difficult, but I managed to do it for you. I did see what Rampage said about Miocic deserving this shot. My mind can't be changed, to be perfectly honest. If there was not a belt on the line, I would not be saying a word. Not one word. It would be completely understandable. But you cannot have a man that hasn't fought or won in half a decade going into the title shot when you have a champion actively defending the interim belt. Defending the interim belt. It's ridiculous. Actually ridiculous. If he weren't doing that, okay, cool. Let's make this legacy fight. It is what it is. And yes, I understand the argument of this fight was made before. They're just carrying it on. Let's not act like the UFC don't go back on things like that. Let's not act like all of a sudden their word is set in stone. It's never been set in stone, and it doesn't have to be. We understand why they are making this fight, and it makes sense. But what doesn't make sense to me is you've got two fighters here that are likely never going to fight again. And you have Tom Aspinall, who's likely going to fight a lot more times. Pour your energy and attention into the future. That just makes logical sense to me as a promoter. You've got one man that's going to be a part of your company for the next 10 years, and you've got two men that are going to be a part of your company for the next 10 months. I don't know. So it's a really weird one. I understand it, kind of, but it's a weird one. And everyone that is getting very upset about this, they're just not thinking logically. It's as simple as that. People will just say, but Jon's the GOAT. Okay. It's like, there's no debate, really. I'm not debating that. It's just we can't have an interim champion defending the belt and getting bypassed by a man who hasn't fought in 5 years. It's like, shouldn't even really be much of a conversation. If this was a year ago, then yeah, okay, you can still sort of argue for Stipe, and Tom hasn't fought anyone at that elite level. Cool, that's completely understandable. But you can't make that conversation anymore. It's just... It just doesn't make any sense from a business standpoint, from a longevity standpoint, from a sporting standpoint, from a championship to interim standpoint. There's no angle that you can spin that makes sense other than it's a legacy fight. Cool. Let's do these legacy fights, but not when it's a champion with an interim champion waiting to fight him. That's not legacy, that's lunacy. Got me on one. And also, my point on this is not how the outcome of the fight would look. I don't know. This is my whole point. I believe Tom is as elite as everyone says. 100%. But also, he's never fought the very, 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 very best. That's exactly why I want to see it. This isn't a question of he certainly wins or he certainly loses. I just always, at any point, this is why this confuses me when fans don't understand this. At any point of the UFC, I want to watch the best fighter A fight the best fighter B. At any point. Any point. And that's what this is. Very simple. Very, very simple. So I don't get why other people wouldn't want that, to be honest. It's very bizarre. Very bizarre. Do I train martial arts? I'll do a little bit of Muay Thai here and there. Not enough. I would like to do more, to be honest. Trying to incorporate a little bit more. Business-wise, John, intact and strapped up, makes more money off 2 fights than Tom would. This is another thing. People say about the business-wise. This is why I would push back on that. If you're talking short-term business success, I believe, yeah, John definitely does more pay-per-views. I don't think that's any question than Tom worldwide, for sure. But business isn't a 6-month plan, it's a 10-year plan, especially with companies that are multi-billion pound companies. So I actually think more business sense would be to promote and deliver a bigger product for Tom Aspinall. Even if Tom Aspinall lost to Jon Jones, that's still more beneficial for the UFC. This is what I don't get. This is what I don't understand. If Tom Aspinall goes out and loses to Jon Jones, that still keeps their star boy intact, but it also just builds the star of Tom Aspinall. More people will know who he is. He'll naturally come back and probably starch a few more people. And then he'll also be able to be boosted by the fact that he fought Jon Jones. And the UFC can promote Jon as still undefeated. And everyone wins. This is what I don't understand. The only reason they are making this fight is because they know it's more favourable for Jon. I'm not saying Tom would indefinitely win. But it's just very, very clear and logical that it's more favourable than Stipe Miocic. No one's disputing that. I didn't see John's Insta story, but a few people have mentioned that to me. Do I think you have a chance in professional MMA with 23-4 kickboxing record on fought 17? Do you have a burning desire to be a mixed martial artist? Do you have the want and the willpower to level up your grappling so that you can A, be offensively good if you need to go there, B, be defensively sound, and C, get back to your feet to get back to your kickboxing? Do you want to commit the next 10 years of your life to being the very, very best mixed martial artist? If all of those things are yes, then for sure, transition over, for sure. Most slept on fight coming up. Oh my goodness, I got the answer straight off my head. The most slept on fight is Michelle Pereira versus Fluffy Hernandez. Whilst they don't have the name value like a lot of fighters in the middleweight division, I believe that fight has future title implications. That's how high level I believe that scrap is. You have the very diverse and now more controlled chaos striking on Michel Pereira. And then you have the striking, the grappling ability, and the relentless melting cardio of Fluffy Hernandez. And I think the winner of that is going to be a serious problem for the next top 5, top 3, top 1 in the 185-pound division. Right, last couple. Yeah, it is insane that Michel Pereira made 170. To be honest, I saw him against Sean Strickland out of camp. He looked about 220 and 6'3", and I was just shocked, absolutely shocked. Yeah, John Jones is not fighting after Stipe, and why would he? You know, like, why would he? It actually makes no sense. People keep mentioning this matchup and saying John would smoke Tom. It's like, okay, maybe he would. Like, maybe he would. But anyone that's watched the sport for any amount of time will know every time you step in the cage, your risk of losing, of injury, of being unlucky, of getting staph and having to take antibiotics, make it to the fight and still fight, they all just increase. So John has got where he's got with skill, but also like anyone who's got to the top, there's also a lot of luck involved as well. To perform within a 20-minute window with so many different nuances that go into a fight camp, and for it all to go your way that many times, by statistical law, it's going to have to go against you eventually. It doesn't matter how good you are. If you're Khabib, if you're Islam, if you're flipping John Jones, GSP, it doesn't matter. Statistically speaking, it will eventually go against you. And when you are towards the back end of your career, you've got 1,000,000 miles off on the clock, and you're coming off a bad injury, those chances just get exponentially higher. So it's not completely dismissing his chance to win. Of course, that would be stupid. It's just thinking from a probability and statistical standpoint. It's like doing MMA Moneyball, essentially. Removing emotion and actually just thinking with some logic. What's happening, Joey? Right, last question. Last question before I run out of battery. And also I've got quite a bit of work to do this evening. And I haven't even had dinner yet. I have elite striking and my defense on the feet, but my grappling is mid. My opinion, or at least just giving you opinions of much more intelligent people than myself, just improve your grappling. And don't just improve your grappling in regards to the defensive position, offensively as well. Give yourself the ability to go anywhere if you need to. If you look, just think of it like this. Think of all of the best fighters in history, look at their games, and then model yourself around that. Of course, it's not as easy to say, I'll watch GSP and I'll be as good as him. Of course not. But zoom out and look what they do. Okay, they all have good jabs. Okay, they can all offensively wrestle. Okay, they mostly all have submission threats. Okay, they all have a great ability to use the cage in their favour and also get back to their feet using the cage if they need to. It's like there's certain blueprints that any fighter is going to need to have. And then what you want to do is just plug in your own strengths to that and then look to level it up like that. Absolutely love Thailand. Thailand was phenomenal. If you're thinking of going there for a year in training, I would suggest to do that, for sure. Nice, my friend. The truth of it is, not just in MMA, but with anything, right? You said there, Ryan. The truth of it is with anything, and this is just me relaying other people's information, but also what I try and do. Look at whatever your respective field is, whether it's content creation, whether it's MMA, whether it's writing, whether it's film production, whatever it is. Look at the very best and just reverse engineer what they do. What are the main characteristics of all the best people in this particular field? And then look to get better at those things. Very, very simple. Just look at the very best, mimic a lot of what they do. How do they train? How do they prepare? How do they recover? How do they learn? How do they improve their knowledge? You know? And then just do it relentlessly and don't even blink unless it's been 10 years if you want to get to the very top. Now, you also have to have self-awareness. If you're not that great, maybe you have to be honest with yourself. Right, I've got to bounce anyway because I'm running out of battery. But thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate the support. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for the engagement. And as always, people, keep it casual.